Hey folks, Dennis Hancock here, UGA Forage Extension Agronomist, the Grassman. Got my sidekick with me today, Taylor Hendricks, who's a PhD student with us. So Taylor, where are we going today?
We are going to Barnesville, Georgia, to the Walters farm. They're having a field day today to talk a little bit about baleage, some soil health, soil sampling stuff as well.
Sounds fun. It's a beautiful day to do it. It's just an absolutely gorgeous day out there, a good spring day. So we're looking forward to that. And you know, baleage has been a subject that we have had a lot of calls and inquiries about. Especially, we always get a lot in the spring because folks are getting ready to make some ryegrass or small grain baleage or something like that. But I think the agenda has us with you on first, talking about the keys to making great baleage, right? And then me kind of coming on after that, talking about some of the economics.
Yeah, the fun stuff, the numbers.
Yeah, whether or not it's going to pay for itself or not. So we'll record a little bit of that and share some of the highlights of that for the program. So I just hope you enjoy the field day with us, and we'll catch you all afterwards.
Stay tuned.
All right, so to make great baled silage, you're first going to have to be able to make good silage, and silage is a forage preservation method that looks at fermenting the plant available sugars into acid, and then that acid is going to lower the pH and prevent spoilage. So this really has to occur in an anaerobic condition, so no oxygen, and that's going to help to prevent mold, yeast, and other bacteria. And then that low pH is going to reduce your enzyme activity and inhibit the growth of those undesirable bacteria. We'll also see some quality advantages. You're going to enable a timely harvest, again, because you can harvest on a good harvest interval rather than delaying because of weather. And that's because of that reduced drying time and lowering your risk of rain damage. Again, you're going to see less leaf shatter loss because you're baling at a higher moisture. We can also see higher forage quality. That's not necessarily because you're going to make a higher quality product, but if you're holding it equal to the same forage that you would bale at a dry hay, you're going to have it be a little bit higher quality, lower NDF, ADF, and ADL, higher crude protein, and you're going to also have increased digestibility and increased palatability because there's more of those plant available sugars still within that forage. But remember, if you bale up garbage, you're going to get garbage out. My friend here, Oscar, might really like garbage, but our cattle are not going to want to. So just because you bale something up at a higher moisture and wrap it in plastic does not mean when you unwrap it, it's going to be magically better. You have to put in a high quality product to get a high quality product out. So how do we do this? I have a couple keys that I'm going to share with you. The first is to cut down no more forage than you can handle. Ideally, the end goal is that your bales will be wrapped within 12 hours of baling. So you really need to match the amount cut with how much you can bale and wrap in one day. So to do that, you need to lay down an appropriate amount of forage for wilting, baling, and wrapping. Ideally, you'd be able to cut mid-afternoon one day and bale and wrap the next day. The second is to choose the right bale wrapper, and some considerations for that are the cost, the labor that you'll need, the speed at which you need to wrap, and the volume of forage that you're going to wrap at one time. So key number 3 is to explore your options, because not every bale wrapper or every option is right for every producer. There's definitely a sliding scale of how you could do this. You could use a smaller, individual wrapper, 3-point hitch wrap for your own use if you're not making a ton of baleage. On the other end, you could do custom hire, have somebody come in and wrap those bales for you. Or you could own your own equipment and do some custom hire on the side to kind of even out those costs. So key number 4, which would also be my key number 1 all the time, is to bale at the right range of moisture. This is super important when you're making a high quality baled silage product. Your ideal range is really 50 to 65% moisture. Any higher than that, you'll have some toxic potential, that Clostridial bacteria, listeriosis issues. And any lower than about 40% moisture, you'll have poor fermentation. There's not enough moisture for those bacteria to really work and then lower that pH for you. So just some effects of moisture content on silage pH. This was a study actually done by Dr. Hancock as part of his graduate work. And we have 3 different moistures that we baled up here, 61% in the green, 50% moisture in the yellow, and 37% moisture in the black. And really, our ideal target is going to be this green at that 61% moisture, where we're going to have our lowest pH, so it's going to be the lowest risk of spoilage there. When you get below that 40% threshold here in that black bar, that's when you're going to not see that same pH drop, and you're going to open yourself up to the option of having increased pH, increased bacteria, increased mold later on. So key number 5 is to really make good bales. You're going to want to maximize your bale size and match that to the tractor that you have available. You want to make really good dense bales, as dense as you can make them, because the denser those bales get, the less oxygen can get stuck inside of them. You're going to want to make, maybe a 4-foot by 5-foot bale is the most popular, and that'll range from 1,100 to 1,500 pounds, depending on what moisture you are baling at. And then the next part is you want to make square edges on your bales. That's really important, especially if you're using an inline wrapper. You want each bale to line up with one another. Anytime that you don't have square edges and your bales don't quite line up, you're going to stretch that plastic and let that kind of be more susceptible to tearing. More oxygen can get in those places. So good square edges are definitely really important to watch for. You're also going to want to use plastic twine or net wrap. Some options, some people will think about using sisal twine, but the lubrication that's on that can really damage your plastic in the long run. Key number 6 is to choose an appropriate site for wrapping. Ideally, you're going to want to wrap at your storage site. You want to reduce your handling, because anytime you pick up that bale and move it, you're going to risk poking a hole in that, scraping it, letting oxygen in, and letting those bales get spoiled. You also want to choose your storage site based on where you're going to be feeding it out. You don't want to wrap and store on one site and then have to haul it all the way across the farm to then go and feed it out later. You're also going to want to store individually wrapped bales on their flat end. That's just because there's more layers of plastic around that end when it goes through that individual wrapper. Now, some other things to think about. You really want to make sure that that site is as flat as possible. If it's not on cleared land, you're going to want to get rid of all those weeds, because even if you go and mow where you had pigweed or something else, those stalks, when you set the bale down on top, is going to poke a hole in that bale. You also want to reduce the habitat for, mice, snakes, anything that a bird or another animal is going to think, hey, I can go and sit on that bale, and as they sit there, poke a hole in it while they're waiting for their next meal. So key number 7 is really to apply enough plastic, but no more. Because that plastic is expensive, but you also have an expensive, high-quality forage option you don't want to let go to waste either. It's definitely important to remember that this plastic that we put on these bales is not impermeable to oxygen. Our rule of thumb at the research farm where I do a lot of my work is 2 layers is 1 and 1 is none. So just because it is not impermeable, you want to add a couple extra layers there and make sure that there's no oxygen getting in. Key number 8 is to feed this forage in an appropriate way. You want to match your quality to animals that need that quality. Remember, this is something that's really a high quality option of your forage. You're not going to, want to feed this to your dry cows. This is going to be something that's a high quality forage. You want to feed it to the animals that need that quality and can use this as kind of your forage supplement. Key number 9 is to feed the bales within 9 months. Now, this is something that I'm looking at for some of my PhD work, and maybe looking at extending out those recommendations to 12 months. But right now, we're going to keep our recommendations at 9 months, more because of how well that plastic can hold up versus, the forage quality within that plastic. Because over time, those bales are going to squat and become more difficult to handle, just because there is higher moisture of those bales. Also, your plastic's going to deteriorate over time. So I don't know if you can see this or not, but I wouldn't be feeding these bales to your cattle that really need high quality forage is probably going to have a good bit of spoilage in there. Key number 10 is to have a plan for handling your plastic. Right now, recycling is not currently an option. There are some companies that are looking at maybe taking some of that ag plastic, buying it back and recycling it, but that's not really a widespread option in a lot of areas. This is something that Dr. Hancock always tells me I'm very lucky to not have to do for my PhD. This is, he took an old square baler and ran some plastic through it to reduce the bulk of that baleage plastic before you take it to the dump. Reducing that bulk, whether you're putting it, all in a big 50-gallon trash can, or if you want to bale it up, don't do it on your, nice baler. But if you have one laying around. But you're really going to want to reduce the amount of plastic that's kind of out floating around. You don't want it blown into your neighbor's field or anything like that.
So we're going to talk about if this is really going to pay for itself or not, because that's an open question. Obviously, it's an issue that everyone wants to know. Is this going to pay for itself? Just to start with a little bit of background, of course, as we all know, our pastures and our feed costs, they roughly account for about 2/3 of our operating expenses for pasture-based or forage-based livestock systems. So especially in the beef, cow, calf operation, that is a huge part of the cost there. The goal here is to try to reduce those costs. And we usually reduce those costs by one of two ways. Our actual input costs go down, or our per unit cost of what actually makes it into the mouth of the animal will go down. And what we're really going to talk about is the latter one of those. Your input costs are going to go up. If you start using a silage special baler and plastic wrap and the labor associated with that, your input cost will go up. But what I'm going to show you is your per unit cost is actually going to go down. Now, as Taylor was talking about, there's several different types of wrappers out there, and these are kind of split in several different ways. I really think of these as individual bale wrappers and inline bale wrappers. The 3-point hitch style, those used to be a lot more common than what they are now. We really don't see too many of those 3-point hitch style wrappers around anymore, but they used to be a lot more common. Most of those were individual bale wrapped systems. The inline wrapper is considerably more expensive. However, it uses a lot less plastic. So we're going to look at the cost of the unit, but also the operating cost, and look at those separately and see how those pencil out. Then we have the plastic cost. On average, these are going to work out to be, they have an advertisement over there for the sun film plastic that they have there for $85 a roll. All right? That's going to do somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 bales worth of forage. So that works out to be roughly about $6 to $8 a ton of dry matter. $6 to $8 a ton of dry matter just in the plastic alone. Now, if you're buying this in bulk, if you're buying a pallet load, you could probably get a better deal, of course. If you're just buying one roll at a time, you're going to pay pretty much full market price. So planning ahead and getting a full pallet load of this stuff is really going to help you out on the cost side. Then if you look at your actual wrapper cost, that's going to be about $2 to $5 a ton of dry matter. The fuel and repairs, they're going to be quite variable depending on the style of wrapper that you have. Some of these don't use much fuel at all, but some of them, then others actually use a lot, and others actually use a lot more labor as well. So labor has to be considered into this scenario too, because it does take some time to wrap these bales up. Now, I will say that there are balers now that are integrated balers and wrappers together. Crone actually has one, and there's a couple other companies. I think McHale has one. There's several different groups that actually have a baler and a wrapper that's integrated together. Now, if you're operating in a dairy situation and you've got a lot of ground to cover in a very short amount of time, or if you're doing some custom work, that's probably going to be very economical for you. But you really got to work your pencil hard to make one of those pencil out. It's a little bit more expensive. Well, not a little bit, a lot more expensive. The first column here is a conventional round bale, a regular old round baler for hay. All right, and then right next to that is the cost of a similar kind of setup, but for high moisture round balers. All right, a high moisture round baler is quite a bit different than a conventional hay baler. The bottom line here of this is actually your annual loan payment. So that's what I'm going to really work off of, is that annual loan payment. The next column there has the cost of an inline wrapper. All right, in this case they figured roughly about $30,000. That's a fairly low-end model, just to be blunt. Some of them may be a little bit more expensive than that. An individual wrapper is what's at the very end, and at $22,500, that's about right for kind of a mid-scale individual wrapper. You can get some considerably cheaper than that, but remember what I said earlier: cheap, easy, or good. You usually have to choose one. So if you tally all that up and you look at your annual operating cost, or just your overhead cost there, the comparison between a good high moisture Baleage type baler and a conventional round baler is about $1,100 difference between them on an annual basis. So we take that and we add that to the inline wrapper line. Annually, our overhead cost there is $8,100. For the individual wrap baler, if we take that $1,100 and we add 53 to it, we get $6,400 annual operating cost for an individual bale wrapper. That's your overhead cost. All right. Now, what are your variable costs like? You have the plastic cost, you have the labor differences, you have the actual operation, the fuel that you're going to consume during that process. There's several different things that are going to be different. Notice that the plastic costs here were figured at $89 a roll. We've already talked about it being probably $85 or less. This was under some more expensive gas scenarios. This was back when gas prices were well over $3 a gallon. Labor cost here was figured at $960. The bottom line is the biggest differences that you're going to see is your plastic cost. The individual wrapper will cost you roughly about two-thirds more in plastic. Your gas cost will be a little bit different, but really your labor differences there is quite a bit higher as well. So your actual total variable cost, and this is on a dollar per ton of as fed. This is not wet weight. This is, or excuse me, dry weight. This is wet weight. $10 a ton for an inline wrapper, and roughly $14 for an individual wrapper. So this first scenario is just looking at storage losses and feeding losses, and the lost value of that. All right. Along the left-hand side here, we have the total number of Baleage bales that are harvested, and all the way from 90 tons as fed, all the way up to 1,000 tons. And it tallies the entire amount of savings. In this case, they assumed $125 a ton. All right, a little bit higher than probably what it is for Baleage or for Bermuda grass, but it's probably about right for ryegrass. Ryegrass is right at about $125 a ton. Right? Now, if we go back to the couple slides ago, where we added that $1,100 plus the cost of, in this case, an inline wrapper, the annual cost of operating or of owning an inline wrapper, our annual cost of ownership was $8,100. The increase in operational costs, if it's got parentheses around it, that's a negative number. All right. So basically, what this says is somewhere between 180 and 270, we hit the break-even point. If we look at that on a cost per ton of forage that we've produced, right there, that between 180 and 270 is our break-even. And actually, I calculated that for you. If you're using an inline wrapper, using these assumptions, to break even just to cover your hay losses, you're going to need to be feeding 216 tons of forage per year. That's roughly about, let's just call it 400 bales, 400 round rolls per year. Just on the storage losses, storage and feeding losses. All right, I'm going to show you in just a moment that the story is more detailed than that when we start looking at the improvements in quality, and it really gets much more economical when we start looking at the yield increase that's possible there too. Okay, now if we're doing this same scenario for an individual bale wrapper, here's our savings from hay storage. This is the cost of annual ownership there. And then if we look at the increase in operating cost and then on a per ton basis there, again it's between 180 and 270, but when you work out the break-even number on this one, it works out to be about 186 tons per year. So you're looking at about 375 tons per year just to cover that would cover your storage losses, your storage and your feeding losses. Okay? So a little bit better than the inline wrapper, but still that's a bigger operation than what a lot of producers are. But the story it gets more complex. Because the product that you're putting up, if you do a good job of harvesting it on time, is going to be a better quality product. It's going to be higher in nutritional value, and you shouldn't have to have as much supplementation going on. So in our case, in this scenario, we assume zero feeding losses. We're just looking at the increase of the quality. All right, so we're forgetting about feeding losses for the time being. We're just looking at the increase in quality. And what we compared this against is good quality hay, average quality hay, and poor quality hay. All right? Now, if you're doing a really good job of making good quality hay, you know, you're probably not going to see a lot of benefit from baleage. But how many of you remember the summer of 2013 when it was raining every other day? Y'all remember that? I do. Because we starved a lot of cows that winter. Some of them we starved them to death. And some of them starved to death with a full belly. Because the quality of that material was so low that it was so fibrous, they were consuming it, but there was not enough energy in them to be able to survive. So baleage allows us to actually be able to harvest in a more timely fashion, even in those kind of adverse conditions. So if we're ever able to compare this to poor quality hay, you know, if we got poor quality hay, we may have to be supplementing at a rate of about a ton of supplement per year. And this is on I believe this is on a per cow basis. If we do Bermuda grass baleage, we should make at least as good quality as our good quality hay. So our supplementation is the same. If we're making winter annual baleage though, which is really the game changer that allows us to make good winter annual forage, winter annual baleage can end up with some really good quality here. 16% crude protein, 62% TDN. Folks, that's rocket fuel. That is absolutely, I mean, that's going to put weight on a lactating cow at that kind of level. So, in that case, the supplementation drops to zero. Long story short on this one, that our net savings, if we're looking at just Bermuda grass, not talking about ryegrass now, we're just looking at making Bermuda grass baleage, on the quality side alone, all these numbers are negative. If we're just trying to increase the quality of Bermuda grass, we're probably not going to be able to make it pencil out just on the basis of the quality increase on Bermuda grass. On winter annuals, though, the story is different. All these numbers are positive. If we're making excellent baleage, which we should be able to make good quality baleage with a baleage system on annual ryegrass, we are going to end up with a much higher quality product, and we're not going to have to do as much supplementation to our beef cattle, and that's actually going to be a positive result. Scenario 3 is factoring in both the improvements in quality and reductions in the storage and feeding losses. And basically I skipped to the end here. In this case, you're looking at a savings of about $8 per cow per year for Bermuda grass baleage, $100 per cow per year for winter annual grass baleage, and this puts it viable for most of that medium-sized 50 to 75 beef cows to purchase the technology. Now, if you're not in the business to purchase it, you can actually hire someone in. Taylor talked earlier about custom hiring this done, and that's where it could be really economical. The fourth one that we're going to go through, this one we'll do real quick, but it's one where we factor in the increase in quality and getting better quality yields off of this field as well. This was done down in Florida, and I think the factor that we would play into this too is that this is looking at just Bermuda grass, but when we consider being able to make ryegrass, maybe even 2 cuttings of ryegrass, as well as 3 to 4, maybe even 5 cuttings of Bermuda grass, this really pencils out well. So they increased their number of cuttings, which meant they could actually harvest more dry matter on a per acre basis. They went from 4 tons of the acre up to 6 tons. They increased their protein, they increased their TDN. Their total cost per acre actually increased, right? Because you're running that acreage more frequently. It went from 400 to 452, but there's a difference between running up your total cost and your final cost. And if you look at it on a cost per ton of dry matter, where it was 100, it's now 72. Your ration cost in this case dropped from $1.86 per head per day down to $1.26 per head per day as a result. The bottom line is, even when we factor in the increase in yield and the better quality and the reduction in the storage and the feeding losses, Baleage makes a whole lot of economic sense. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the field day along with us. I know I had a good time. It was a great crowd there, wasn't it?
Yeah, they asked a lot of questions. We're real excited about what we had to say.
Yep, it's always good. This middle Georgia area has got a lot of great producers, and always a pleasure to come down here. So we hope you've learned a little something from our highlights, and we hope you stay tuned, and we'll see you down the road.
Yep. See ya.